morning. Oh, it's so good. See, sometimes I go out and I speak and I go, good morning, and the audience goes, I go, I'm in education, like I say good morning, you say good morning. It is really my honor and pleasure to be here today for a whole host of reasons, but most importantly, because you are allowing me to actually live out a fantasy that I've had. See, the reality is that and I actually need to thank Ralph for this opportunity, I have to tell you. You're probably not even sure if you knew about this. Ralph talked to me when I first went into philanthropy, because I was like, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. And the people were like, if you need to figure out like how this stuff works, there's somebody you ought to talk to. And he tried to explain it to me, and I still didn't quite understand. And so I had this fantasy of getting all the foundations in a room and having this big theory of action up on the wall where we would say, and here's how we transform education. And then we would all work together, picking off pieces of the theory of action in a coordinated fashion to drive impact. And yeah. I had spent 5.5 years at the Gates Foundation, and I learned a lot about how we do and we don't as a country, as foundations, as nonprofits, as school systems, come together around solving our toughest problems in education. And I have to say, most of the time, I've been disappointed at our inability to actually focus our efforts and to think coherently and comprehensively and to drive a coherent and comprehensive agenda over time. There is no issue that is more important in our pipeline. We know it. The research shows it to us over and over again, that if we don't actually get our kids reading by 3rd grade, it makes everything, every single thing in the educational process more difficult. We don't do it for most of our kids, and we especially don't do it for our kids that are most in need and our kids with special needs. Yet, we've talked about it over and over again. We've had multiple education presidents. We've had campaigns and initiatives and lots of different things. Millions upon millions poured into curriculum and instructional approaches, and we haven't cracked this code. And I would say that the fractured nature of what we actually have in the field is the evidence of our fractured pace and approach to solving problems. I believe the only way we are going to solve these tough problems is what you're trying to do here today. What this represents. An opportunity to come together around a strategy that is actually coherent, that has clear metrics and goals, that identifies a problem that you can actually get your arms around, that engages both the public sector and the private sector, and recognizes that as powerful as philanthropy is, individual philanthropies have limited ability to actually have impact on problems this big without leverage, without cooperation, without doing something bigger than each individual institution. It is a powerful opportunity to come together to do something big, as our president would say. And I'm just happy to be here with you. Now, this is not going to be easy. The good news is that we actually know a lot. We know an awful lot of things that work. We know a lot about the conditions that get in the way of our kids being prepared to learn. We know that we often intervene way too late. We know that when we do intervene, we intervene with resources, especially in the earliest ages, that are not always high quality. But we know what quality looks like. Those quality resources do exist. We do see places where the people who care for our children are taught how to help them get ready for literacy and for school systematically. And yet we ask the same question here that we ask everywhere. If we know how to do it for some, why don't we do it for all? And with that, I need to do at least one shameless plug. In this room, we have a bunch of people who were fortunate enough to be among the 1,698 folks who applied to I3 who actually received funding. Would you all please stand up for a second? Before you sit down, we also have a bunch of people in the room who were very close. They were high scoring. They had outstanding proposals. They've got great track records of success. We've also highlighted those people as well, those people who scored 80 and above. Would you stand up? These organizations represent, you can sit down, sorry. These organizations represent the opportunity, the potential to actually get out of our own way, to take things that actually are promising and figure out how you get them to scale. We as government have a role in figuring out how we create the context for that to happen and giving clear metrics to support the demonstration of efficacy, to allowing resources to flow towards real evaluation to make sure that when we tell people something's going to work, it's actually true. But most importantly, we have a responsibility to make sure that we can answer the question when people ask, what does work? There is something there. There is something to point towards. These organizations and many others like them are out there doing great work. They are doing it every day for our young people. They are giving the kids who need it most the opportunity for success. They're doing it in innovative ways that are about professional development, about the effective use of data, about bringing in experienced volunteers. All different ways of getting to this goal that you're gathered here today to go after. They were there before there was an I3. Many of them had the data before of their efficacy. And so the question becomes, can we take this unique opportunity to say, this is how we're going to work? A little bit of money for things with a little bit of evidence. A lot of money for things with a lot of evidence. The public sector playing its important role and philanthropy playing its role in helping to shape that pipeline to make sure that there is plenty to deliver. To make sure that these communities of practice form so knowledge transfers more quickly between organizations. So that on the demand side, people know what they should be looking for in order to make sure that what they put in front of our children and in their communities and with the parents are things that actually can work for them, that will work for them. Easily said, it's been said before, today it can be done. So with that, I want to say thank you for this opportunity. I have every confidence that this is the room that is actually going to do it. I hope you do too. Thank you, and now I'll take questions. Anyone? Anyone? You don't have to ask questions.
I can ask a question if there isn't one in the room. I am Grantmakers for Children, Youth, and Families is a very anxious and willing partner in this effort. And I had one question for you regarding how have you and the department connected with the business community around this broader innovation and improvement agenda?
A couple of different ways. The first way they weren't exactly happy about, as many of my foundation friends in the room know, we asked for a 20% match to the I3 grants. Many of them actually got hit up pretty hard as well. And so the time frame and the fact that they didn't know a lot of the grantees was their first experience with us trying to say, get in and get in fast. What we've tried to do is actually put together a much more comprehensive outreach strategy. And we've identified in parallel with, frankly, the framework that you put forward, we have a framework that mirrors it almost and says, look, we have issues that we know we need to tackle around early learning, around readiness in reading and mathematics, around transitions between middle school and high school, and a transition on to post-secondary, and a number of other things as well. Business people, like foundations, have things that they tend to care more about or less about. And we've tried to say, look, there are smart ways for you to engage. There's smart ways for you to engage because of your resources and your ability to invest in things, corporate giving. Your people, to leverage your volunteers, your expertise, to bring real intellectual property, real expertise to solving the toughest problems in our schools and school systems, and frankly, other communities that they serve. And then finally, their voices, bringing their powerful and usually much more sustainable voices to the conversation, right? So if you think about the likelihood that a CEO of a company will be there longer than a superintendent, it is true. And in a given community, we know how powerful the business leaders in most communities tend to be. Their ability to drive civil conversations and civic investment, usually pretty significant. The time they spend in a concerted way doing more than just the normal bully pulpit, not so clear. You know, I often ask CEOs when I have the opportunity to meet them, because so many of them talk about how important education is. And I always say, and I know that these policies are very important, I say, so what percentage of your head of government relations evaluation is tied to how the education policy stuff gets set? Like, do you have specific goals for what happens? And do the firms that you spend millions of dollars on each year know that this is important to you? That's all I can say to them. I can't say anything else than that. But the point is not lost. Other questions? Back there? Oh, and here? Oh, sorry. She has a mic.
Good morning. I'm Sue Renner with the David and Laura Mirage Foundation. I recently read an article in the New York Times about social innovation bonds, and I wasn't clear. Is this a program that's already starting? Is it something that is still in the works? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Excuse me. So I'm going to be, as usual, a little longer answer to your question than what you asked. One of the things that we're trying to do is, think about what can you do from the federal government, what can't you do? We're a lot about creating the context for better innovation. We believe that one of the big things about setting a better context for innovation in the social sector is to make performance really matter and to have incentives aligned around that. So what you're going to hear from us and across the administration is a focus on pay for success models, right? So is there a way that you can actually spend public resources on the outcome, not the input? And one model of how that can work are these social impact, social innovation bonds. You'll hear them called different names. For those not familiar, what it is that usually a private sector entity takes on the risk of implementing a solution. So one of the most notable examples is in Australia, what they said is, we have a problem with recidivism. We know that there are some programs that are more successful than others. Over a given 3-year period, normally we would spend X amount of dollars, 15 million, call it, on services for that population. What we'd like to do is to actually spend that money differently. We'd like a private entity to take the risk and pay the suppliers during that time frame. And if they do so, then we will not only allow them to capture the 15 million, but if they do a much better job on very clearly defined metrics around reducing recidivism, then they'll have the benefit of earning up to $17 million, right? During that same time frame. Now, if they don't perform, then obviously you don't pay out the $15 million. I mean, that's an overly simplistic way to describe it. It requires private partnership, so we're very interested in it. $100 million has been set aside for that kind of work across the administration in the 2012 budget. We are now in the process of figuring out where are the smartest places to try and apply it, which means both where do you think you have the metrics to know that you can clearly define what a win is? Where do you think you have sufficient supply that it actually will create a market by doing it this way? And then obviously, where is there significant enough private sector interest to want to make the upfront investment? Interestingly, readiness, early learning and readiness in reading by 3rd grade is one of the areas that has come up as a high potential area.
Hi, Shirley Sagawa with the Center for American Progress.
Hi, Shirley.
Good to see you. I'd be interested in hearing if any of the I-3 grants or applicants included citizen service as a strategy for their educational goals. Citizen service, volunteers, or AmeriCorps.
Yes, so there are a number of them that actually include include service of a variety of kinds, but the citizen service in particular, one that comes to off the top of my head is the partnership between City Year, Communities and Schools, and the Johns Hopkins on the turnaround of failing high schools. As we all know, Teach for America relies heavily on citizen service and AmeriCorps folks, and there I would probably recommend identify 3 to 4 others that are in there if I had it off the top of my head, but I can't off the top of my head.
Ron Thorpe from WNET, the public television station in New York City. Jim, you just mentioned Australia. You and Secretary Duncan and your colleagues at the department, this is the first Department of Education to embrace the international benchmarks and to move our country into that international conversation around education. How do you, what models out there do you advise this group to look at as you think about school readiness, attendance, and summer learning, other countries that are doing it differently?
So, I mean, before I jump into that, let me just make one point. You know, it's really interesting, that's always a loaded word. It's really interesting that saying something which seems as evident as all the best ideas may not start here in America has become controversial. And so Ron and others are working with us to engage in pulling together folks across international communities to talk about everything from how do everyone's working on these same issues, by the way. How do we actually improve the effectiveness of our teachers? How do we address the needs of high-need children? And finding people who are solving these problems in different ways. Particularly in, I'm getting the axe. Particularly in the early learning space, one of the places that I'm actually very interested in taking a look at, oddly enough, is Costa Rica. Costa Rica, for those of you who don't know, has extremely high early literacy rates. It's not a country that's known for its formal education system. It's not a country that's known for significant levels of resources, and yet still very, very high levels of literacy. Basic literacy, but literacy. So that's one of the places that I'll throw out, since I'm supposed to wind up, that I don't think was on anybody's list. Good deal. And with that, I'm done. Have a great one.